The first thing my husband stole from me that night was not my marriage. It was the room. We were standing under the gold hotel lights at Hale Whitmore's annual office party, and I still had the pale paper wristband from the surgical floor tucked inside my sleeve because my incision hurt every time I breathed too deep. Alistair had one hand around a champagne flute and the other around Vanessa Reed's elbow when someone from the board asked if I would be joining the leadership photo. He smiled like I was a joke he had told too many times and said, "She's just a housewife." A few people laughed. A few looked away. I felt the floor go cold beneath my heels. 10 minutes later, he dragged me into the VIP lounge, dropped divorce papers in front of me, and set a $1 million check on the glass table, like a tip after bad service. "My mistress is the new CEO," he said. "Take the money and get out." I signed without a word. Then I picked up my phone, called Chairman Martin Hale, and said, "The stock transfer is ready." I did not remember the drive home from the hotel. I remembered the way the seatbelt pressed against my stitches. I remembered the smell of somebody else's cologne still clinging to Alistair's tuxedo sleeve when he had gripped my arm upstairs. I remembered standing in my own kitchen at 2 a.m. under that weak yellow light over the sink, trying to peel off the bandage tape without pulling my skin. Our house sat in a tidy subdivision outside St. Louis where people still put out mums in the fall and waved even when they were angry with each other. Mine looked exactly the same as it had the day before. White shutters, brick mailbox, the little brass wreath hook by the door I kept meaning to replace. That was the strangest part. A life can split open, and the dishwasher still needs unloading. I slept in the recliner because I could not lie flat after surgery. At 6:30, the refrigerator hummed, the coffee maker clicked on, and my phone started buzzing on the side table. It was Darlene from across the street, calling too early because early calls are never for good things. "Ellie, honey," she said, her voice lowered in that church parking lot way women use when they already know more than they should. "Are you even supposed to be on your feet after surgery at 52? That was how the morning introduced me back into my own life. Ellie, 52. Still sore, still stitched, still expected to be polite. I told her I was fine, which was not true, and shuffled to the kitchen in one of Alistair's old college sweatshirts. The tile felt cold through my socks. On the table sat a stack of envelopes I had meant to sort before the operation. Utility bills, a card from my cousin in Tulsa, a thick cream packet from the company courier with Hale Whitmore board materials stamped across the corner. That should have gone to Alistair's office. I stood there for a long moment with one hand braced against the chair, looking at that packet like it might explain the sound I had heard in the ballroom when people laughed at me. For years, people had called me a homemaker, and I suppose that was true on paper. I cooked, kept the house running, handled contractors, holidays, family birthdays, and every invisible thing that made a polished life look effortless. What they did not say, because Alistair preferred it forgotten, was that before I stayed home full-time, I had been a CPA. I built the company's first internal controls at our own dining room table. I taught him how to read cash flow when the bank nearly pulled their line of credit in year 3. I had spent a decade keeping vendor files, tax calendars, and payroll from falling apart while he shook hands and gave speeches. Then the company grew, and my name grew smaller. I opened the packet with a butter knife because my fingers were still stiff from the IV. Inside was the agenda for a special leadership session, bios, compensation schedules, a glossy succession memo, and a profile photo of Vanessa Reed smiling like she had invented daylight. Proposed Chief Executive Officer. I sat down slowly. My incision burned. There was a paragraph calling her a transformational leader, prepared to modernize the company's next era. There was another describing recent transition planning as the culmination of a unified internal recommendation. Unified. My laugh came out thin and ugly. Then I saw the appendix clipped behind the compensation sheet. It was not meant for general distribution. Legal language, voting alignment, temporary authority provisions during marital separation. I read it once, then again, slower. Someone had built a path that treated my shares, or rather the shares held in trust for my benefit, as if they would drift quietly into Alistair's control the moment I stepped aside. Not because I had agreed to it, because they believed I would never understand it. There was a note in the margin, typed in a different font, probably from some late internal revision. Keep Eleanor out of the room. She's medicated and emotional. I put the page down and stared at the fruit bowl in the middle of the table. Bananas too ripe, one apple going soft on one side. Normal things. Steady things. My whole married life had been built on ordinary objects staying where I put them. That was why the betrayal felt so obscene. Alistair was not merely leaving me for a younger woman. He was trying to convert me into a harmless little story people could repeat over cocktails. Poor Ellie, sweet Ellie, didn't understand business, signed and went home. The problem with that story was that I did understand business. At 10:15, he finally texted. Hope you're resting. Last night got unfortunate. We can do this cleanly if you don't make it messy. I looked at that message until the screen dimmed. Not a single word about what he had said. Not a single word about Vanessa. Just that smooth, managerial tone he used when he wanted wrongdoing to sound like scheduling. I typed nothing back. Instead, I went to the hall closet where I kept old family records in labeled banker's boxes. Tax returns, mortgage renewals, corporate holiday lists from years when the company had only 12 employees. In the very back, under a stack of obsolete insurance files, I found a leather folder with the old founder minutes from the early days. Something in me had already started to harden. Because if Alistair wanted me out of the room so badly, there was something in those rooms he was afraid I still knew how to read. The leather folder smelled like dust, toner, and the old cedar chest my mother used to keep winter blankets in. I carried it to the kitchen table with both hands because my stomach still pulled when I twisted too fast. Outside, a lawn crew had started up somewhere down the block. The whine of a leaf blower moved up and down the street while I opened the metal clasp and looked at the first years of a life I had almost let him rewrite. Back then, there had been no ballroom, no executive wing, no women in fitted white jackets smiling for succession packets. There had been one narrow warehouse with a loading dock that leaned a little to the left and a front office that smelled like burnt coffee and copy paper. Alistair had been handsome in an unfinished sort of way then, all appetite and nerve. He could charm a banker in 10 minutes and forget to pay the light bill by Friday. I was the one who remembered due dates, tax deposits, workers' comp renewals, passwords, vendor disputes, and which client always paid late but eventually paid double. People love to say a company was built on vision. Most companies are built on somebody standing at a folding table, making sure the numbers survive the man telling the story. In the folder, I found early minutes, share ledgers, incorporation drafts with my pencil marks in the margins, and a photo of the two of us so young, I almost looked like a cousin of myself. I was wearing a navy cardigan and holding a yellow legal pad. Alistair had his arm around my waist, leaning in like he had already decided the world would open for him. The first memory came back so clearly, it made my throat ache. We had just come out of a meeting with the bank after nearly losing our operating line. I had been the one who rebuilt the forecast and caught the inventory discrepancy that would have sunk us. The branch manager had shaken Alistair's hand, but he had answered 3 of her hardest questions by looking at me. When we got back to the office, the place was empty, except for the hum of the copier and rain ticking against the back windows. I was stacking loan papers when Alistair stepped behind me and slid his hand to the small of my back. It was not a careless touch. It was how he guided me when he wanted me to feel chosen. He turned me gently toward the conference table, pressed his forehead to mine, and smiled that quiet smile he used only in private. "We signed together," he said. "I don't walk into any room without you." Then he kissed me, not in any hurried way, just warm and sure, one hand still at my back, the other spreading the papers flat on the table, as though our marriage and the business were one clean thing that could be held steady if we both put our palms on it. I had believed him. That was the humiliating part of memory. It is not only that you remember what happened, you remember how fully you trusted it while it was happening. I kept turning pages. Payroll reconciliations, insurance binders, my old notes from an audit prep week when I had barely slept. On one yellow sticky note, in his slanted handwriting, he had written, "Don't let me drown in my own confidence." It made me smile before it made me angry. The second memory came from years later, when the company had grown enough to become polished, and I had already begun disappearing from the official story. It was the night of a holiday gala downtown. I was in a black dress I had almost returned because it felt too expensive, standing in the backstage corridor outside the ballroom while staff moved centerpieces and checked microphones. I remember the smell of perfume and hotel carpet and hot metal from the stage lights. I had started to say I did not belong there anymore, not really, that he had younger people now, sharper people, people who knew how to turn themselves into leadership material. Alistair had stopped me with the back of his fingers against my cheek. That touch undid me then. It was so light, almost absent-minded, but intimate in a way public affection never is. He tucked one loose strand of hair behind my ear, straightened my necklace, then kissed my temple and said, "When the room turns ugly, look for my hand." A minute later, he had held that hand out to me from the ballroom entrance, and I had gone in smiling because I thought I still knew where I belonged. Sitting at the kitchen table now, I closed my eyes for a moment and let the pain move through me cleanly. Not just grief, recognition. He had been preparing my erasure long before he announced it. First, he moved me out of the building, then out of the meetings, then out of the photographs, finally out of the language. Housewife, emotional, medicated. As if the woman who built the bones of his company had somehow drifted in from the catering staff. My coffee had gone cold beside me. I drank it anyway. At the bottom of the folder, beneath the founder minutes, I found a cream-colored sheet folded in thirds. It was older than the rest, the edges soft with handling. A handwritten note was clipped to it in Martin Hale's heavy block letters. Protective shares. For Eleanor, if fiduciary loyalty is ever breached. I read it twice. Then a third time, while something slow and deliberate settled into place inside me. If Martin had written that years ago, then he had seen the kind of man my husband could become long before I had let myself see it. I waited until mid-afternoon to drive to the office because that was when most of the senior staff drifted into meetings and the lobby thinned out. My doctor had told me not to drive for another few days unless I absolutely had to. I remember staring at the steering wheel in my driveway and deciding that a marriage could end from neglect, lies, or boredom. But a company only got stolen when good people stayed home. The building looked polished in a way I had once been proud of. Clean glass, stone planters by the entrance, the brushed steel sign with Hale Whitmore across the front in letters I had helped pay for when we still counted every expansion against payroll. I parked in the visitor section because my old space near the side door had been reassigned months ago. Another small deletion I had told myself not to take personally. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and burnt espresso from the machine near reception. My incision pulled with every step. I kept one hand over my stomach and nodded at a young receptionist who smiled at me with the careful confusion of somebody who knew my face but not my rank. "I just need a few personal files from upstairs," I said. She gave me a temporary badge without asking questions. That hurt more than it should have. The executive floor was quieter than the rest of the building. Carpeted, overheated, too still. I passed the framed photos from charity luncheons and supplier awards and paused at the one from 3 Christmases earlier, where I was standing at the end of a group shot half in shadow while Alistair took center position with his hand lifted in mid-laugh. I had not noticed at the time how expertly he had begun arranging me toward the edges. My old access code no longer worked on the records room, but the copier alcove down the hall was open. A printer had jammed, and somebody had left a stack of fresh output on the side tray while they went to find help. The top page carried the heading, CEO Transition Support Materials. I looked up once, then pulled the stack toward me. There it was. The same succession packet from my kitchen table, but thicker. Internal annotations, routing instructions, a revised voting summary with my name reduced to an inconvenience. One line had been highlighted for legal review. Spousal share influence expected to neutralize upon execution of marital separation documents. Expected to neutralize. That was the phrase that cooled me all the way through. Not transfer fairly, not be evaluated, not go through proper review. Neutralize. Like I was a chemical problem in the room. Under that sat a draft board note describing Vanessa as the natural operational successor, and me as a non-participating domestic spouse. I stood there holding those words while the copier clicked and reset itself beside me. Non-participating. I had once slept on a folding cot in the warehouse office during an audit week because we could not afford to send records off-site. I had hand-built the vendor history they still used to challenge freight discrepancies. I had caught enough leakage in the 4th year to cover 2 full salaries. But on paper, in the story they were preparing to hand the board, I had become decorative. A woman who arranged flowers, cooked casseroles, and floated around the edges of business without ever touching the machinery. Footsteps sounded down the hall. I gathered the pages into one neat stack and moved instinctively into the shadow beside the glass-walled conference room before I could even tell myself why. Through the tinted pane, I saw them. Alistair first, phone in one hand, jacket unbuttoned, moving with that impatient forward lean he used when he expected the world to make way for him. Vanessa came in behind him carrying a folder and smiling up at him like she had already been crowned. He stopped near the end of the table. She set the folder down, stepped close, and reached up to straighten his tie. It was such a small gesture that anybody passing by might have missed the cruelty in it. Then her fingertips drifted to his cheek. Not quick, not accidental. A soft little brush under his eye, familiar as breath. My whole body went still. I felt, not remembered, but felt, the ghost of his fingers against my own face in that backstage corridor years ago. The way he had tucked my hair back and kissed my temple and told me to look for his hand when the room turned ugly. Vanessa leaned in and kissed the corner of his mouth. Alistair smiled without surprise. Then he placed his hand at the small of her back and guided her toward the head chair at the table. The exact same touch. The exact same claim. For one awful second, it was not the office around me at all. It was the rain-dark conference room from our early years, his forehead against mine, his hand warm at my back while he said he did not walk into any room without me. Except apparently he did. He just preferred not to walk in without a woman who made him look larger. I do not know how long I stood there. Long enough for the pain in my stomach to sharpen. Long enough for the first wave of humiliation to pass and something colder to take its place. Because that was the moment I finally understood the scale of it. Vanessa was not merely sleeping with my husband. She was being fitted into my place, using my own vanished life as a template. The hand at the back, the face touch, the right side of the room, the private rehearsal before public power. If I burst in then, if I said one wild thing, if I let my voice shake the wrong way, I would hand Alistair exactly what he needed. An emotional wife, a jealous interruption, a woman in pain making scenes because she could not accept time had moved on. So I did the one thing he had never been careful enough to prepare for. I took the packet. Not all of it, just the annotated summary, the routing page, and the draft note describing me as neutralized and domestic. I slid them into my tote, walked calmly to the elevator, and did not let myself cry until the doors closed. Back in my car, I sat with both hands on the wheel until my breathing steadied. Then I opened my phone and searched my old archived emails for Martin Hale. One message came up from years earlier. If fiduciary trust is ever breached, Eleanor, call me before anyone else. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun had shifted low enough to throw long bars of light across the garage door. I sat in the car until the engine ticked itself quiet. My hands smelled faintly of printer toner. There was a sharp, mean pulse under my bandage where I had moved too much, too soon. I remember pressing my palm there and thinking that pain has a way of simplifying things. It strips away vanity. It strips away performance. It leaves only the next necessary step. Inside, the house was exactly as I had left it. One cereal bowl in the sink, the throw blanket folded over the recliner, a vase of grocery store carnations on the counter from a neighbor who still thought I was recovering from something ordinary. I took out the annotated pages from my tote and laid them beside the board packet on the kitchen table, weighing the corners down with the salt shaker and my reading glasses case. Then I made tea, because women like me have a habit of putting the kettle on before we dismantle a man. I read every page again, this time with a yellow legal pad beside me. I wrote down verbs first. Neutralize, transition, support, consensus. The language told on them before the numbers did. People who are doing something honest do not write as if they are moving furniture in the dark. At 5:15, Alistair called. I watched his name flash across the screen until it stopped, then started again. On the third attempt, I answered. "You left the hotel without speaking to me," he said, sounding irritated rather than worried. "That was childish." I leaned back in the chair and looked out at the bare maple tree beyond the patio doors. You seemed busy. He exhaled through his nose. I could picture that expression exactly, the one that said he was about to explain reality to a lesser mind. Last night was unfortunate. Vanessa's promotion and our divorce are separate issues, and I need you to act like an adult about that distinction. There it was. Not regret. Instruction. I said nothing. His voice flattened further. Take the money, Ellie. Rest. Heal. Do not wander into corporate matters you no longer understand. No longer. That word sat between us like a stain. Then he gave me the line he thought would close my mouth for good. You used to be good at keeping a home. Let me handle grown-up problems. For a second, the old reflex rose in me. Not to shout, never that. To explain myself. To remind him of receipts balanced at midnight, payroll runs saved, audits passed, holidays hosted for men who later forgot I had set their plates out. But explanation is wasted on people who survived by shrinking you first. So I only said, I'll keep that in mind. He mistook calm for surrender. Men like Alistair often do. After he hung up, I called Celia Rowan, a family attorney I knew from church-adjacent fundraisers and one miserable probate dispute with my aunt's estate 6 years earlier. She was not warm exactly, but she was clean in the way that matters. Precise, unimpressed. She called me back within 20 minutes and listened without interrupting while I walked her through the divorce packet, the board materials, the trust language, and the timing. When I finished, she said, Do not sign anything else. Do not answer any text that does not require a factual response. And if there are beneficial shares tied to a protective clause, I want the trust documents before your husband realizes you've read them correctly. That was the first moment all day I felt something steadier than anger. Not comfort. Structure. I gave her Martin Hale's old email and the wording from the note I had found. She was silent for a beat, then said, That is not the kind of language an experienced chairman writes casually. Someone tried to guard you. After that, I called Martin. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the dull hotel clatter behind him, silverware and low voices and money being reassured in public. Eleanor? He did not sound surprised. I have the revised packet, I said, and the language they're using on the shares. I assumed you would. There was no pity in his voice. I was grateful for that. I need to know, I said, whether Alistair can actually do what he thinks he can. No, Martin said. Not if the protective structure is triggered properly. But that depends on whether you are prepared to stop being polite. I looked down at my notepad. My tea had gone lukewarm. The house gave one soft, settling creak, the kind it made every evening when the temperature dropped. I signed the divorce packet, I said. Good, he replied. I closed my eyes. Good? He wanted your signature because he believes it clears his path, Martin said. In fact, it may have just cleared mine. But I will not move on instinct, Eleanor. I need proof of breach, cleanly documented. If you bring me that, I can open the door he thinks he has already locked. After we hung up, I called the one person in the company who had always looked me in the eye and answered the question I actually asked. Irene Dalton, corporate secretary. She picked up quietly, as if she had been expecting me too. Irene, I said, I need to know which board packet is real. She did not pretend not to understand. Then she gave me the first true gift of the war. There are two, she said, and I kept both. I met Irene the next morning in the basement cafe of an old medical office building 2 towns over, the kind of place nobody went unless they had blood work, physical therapy, or something private to discuss in a corner booth. She chose it for a reason. No company people, no polished lobby, no one from Hale Whitmore dropping in for a latte and gossip. I got there first and ordered decaf because my body still felt 1 inch away from revolt. The place smelled like burnt toast and floor disinfectant. A television in the corner played a daytime cooking show with the sound off. I sat with my coat still on and watched 2 elderly men split a bran muffin while I tried not to move too much against the pull in my stomach. Irene arrived carrying a plain canvas tote and a legal pad. She had worked at Hale Whitmore for 19 years and had the kind of face people overlooked until they needed a rule explained. Trim gray bob, sensible boots, reading glasses on a chain. She was not sentimental. She was not intimidated. She was, in my experience, the only person in that executive orbit who still treated minutes, signatures, and process as if they mattered more than ego. She slid into the booth and set the tote beside her coffee. "You look terrible," she said. "Thank you. You should be home." So should a lot of people. That earned the ghost of a smile. For a moment, neither of us touched the bag. Then Irene unzipped it and laid the first packet on the table. Board agenda, succession memo, voting summary. The version I had found in my kitchen. She set the second beside it. Same headings, same page count at a glance. Different appendices, different routing notes, different outcome. "It started with formatting," she said. "That's how I noticed. Alistair never notices formatting. Vanessa never notices anything unless it photographs well." I looked down at the pages and felt something in me settle. Not because the betrayal hurt less. Because paper has a mercy emotion does not. It stays where you put it. Irene tapped the upper right corners. "This one went through standard board circulation. This one was assembled later and routed only to selected members with a revised support memo. He told me it was a late strategic update. He did not realize I archived draft trails." I read carefully, line by line. The real packet made Vanessa look ambitious, certainly, but not inevitable. The altered one made her seem pre-approved, operationally indispensable, almost ordained. In the altered version, my position had been reduced to a footnote under contingent domestic matters. In the real version, there was no language neutralizing my beneficial shares at all. "He inserted it," I said. "With outside counsel comments stripped off, yes," Irene said. "Or someone did on his instruction." The waitress came by with more hot water neither of us had asked for. Irene waited until she left. "Why now?" I asked. "Why bring it to me instead of the board?" "Because the board won't listen to a hunch," she said. "And because I wanted to know whether you still remembered where the bones are buried." I almost laughed at that. It was as close to affection as Irene ever got. She reached back into the tote and pulled out expense ledgers, reimbursement summaries, and a printout of executive card activity. Hotel weekends listed as client development, car service charges on Sundays, spa invoices attached to regional retention meetings. There were enough entries to suggest a pattern, but not yet enough to detonate a man like Alistair in public. "Affair spending?" I asked. "Misuse of company funds," Irene said. "The affair is just how we got sloppy." I followed the dates with my finger. Several lined up with weekends Alistair had told me he was traveling for lender dinners or site tours. One in particular caught at me. A lake resort invoice from the exact weekend of my recovery after the surgery consult, when he had kissed my forehead in the kitchen, said he hated leaving me alone and told me he would be back by Sunday night. There it was again. the private tenderness curdling in hindsight. Irene watched my face but did not soften her voice. There's more. She handed me a printed text chain from Vanessa to a senior HR consultant. Most of it was bland office language until one message, sent at 11:42 p.m., made my eyes stop. Once the divorce packet is signed, the spouse piece is neutralized and the vote gets cleaner. Not woman, not wife. Spouse piece. Like I was a hinge to be removed from a cabinet door. I set the page down very carefully. Did Martin see this? I asked. Not yet, Irene said. I wanted to confirm the trust structure first. If we move too early, Alistair turns this into marital theater. If we move correctly, it becomes fiduciary misconduct. That was the word I needed. Not humiliation, not revenge. Misconduct. Something colder than pain. My phone buzzed on the table. Alistair. Irene glanced at the screen. Answer, she said. I did. His voice came smooth as polished wood. Where are you? At an appointment. You should have told me if you were leaving the house, he said. You're still recovering. There are sentences that sound protective until you lay them beside the rest of the man. Then you hear the lock click inside them. I'm fine, I said. I doubt that, he replied. Listen to me carefully. Do not go digging through company records because you're upset. You don't have the stamina for this, and frankly, you don't have the context anymore. Irene made one note on her legal pad while he spoke. Then he added, almost kindly, Be smart for once, Ellie. Take what I offered. Nobody in that building is waiting to hear from you. I looked at the ledgers, the packets, the text chain, the years of my own handwriting hidden beneath his revised story. That would be easier for you, I said. He went quiet for half a beat, just long enough. After I hung up, Irene turned the legal pad toward me. She had written 3 words in block capitals. Pattern, control, intent. Then she reached into the tote one last time and slid across a cream-colored photocopy with Martin Hale's signature at the bottom. The founder letter. Protective shares. For Eleanor, if fiduciary loyalty is ever breached. Miniature, old-fashioned, devastating. I read it once and felt the room change. Because for the first time since the ballroom, I was no longer only the woman being erased. I was the woman the company had quietly been built to protect, if it ever came to this. Martin Hale asked me to meet him at his club, not because he liked expensive rooms, but because men like him had spent 40 years learning where other men did their loosest talking. The place was all dark wood, leather chairs, and the stale dignity of money that had outlived its first owner. I wore a wool coat over a navy dress that still fit a little wrong across my middle because of the swelling. My body had not caught up with the war yet. Martin was already seated in a corner alcove with a pot of tea and a folder set square in front of him. He stood when I approached, which told me more than sympathy would have. Respect is often quiet. You brought pain with you, he said, glancing once at the way I lowered myself carefully into the chair. I brought paper, I said. That too. I handed him copies of the altered packet, the reimbursement trail, Vanessa's text about the spouse piece, and Irene's notes on the routing changes. He read everything without interruption, 1 page at a time, his heavy reading glasses low on his nose. The club was hushed around us. Somewhere beyond the paneled wall, silverware chimed, and a man laughed too loudly at something he wanted other people to hear. When Martin finished, he set the papers down and folded his hands over them. "Well," he said, "your husband has confused access with ownership." I felt something sharp and clean move through me. "He thinks the divorce clears his path," I said. "It clears yours faster," Martin replied, "but only if he steps fully into the misconduct, and only if the board sees it all at once." He opened the folder he had brought. Inside were old founder minutes, the original trust language, and an internal memorandum I had never seen. It dated back 17 years to the audit crisis that nearly broke us. Martin had written it himself after I rebuilt the books and found the leakage that saved the company's line of credit. In recognition of material contribution to continuity, stability, and fiduciary preservation, protective shares shall remain beneficially aligned to Eleanor Whitmore in the event of spousal or executive breach. I read that sentence twice. Material contribution. Not sentimental support, not loyalty. Contribution. Martin watched me absorb it. "I never trusted Alistair with gratitude," he said. "Men who rise quickly often resent the witnesses who knew what they were before the suit fit." I thought of all the years I had stood half a step behind my own life. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Discipline," he said, "and timing." That afternoon, Irene sent me 2 more documents from a private account. One was an internal succession memo Vanessa had redlined herself. She wanted my name removed entirely from a historical note on founding operations because, as she had written in the margin, it muddies the forward-facing narrative. The other was a draft statement prepared for the board in case I became disruptive after the divorce announcement. It described me as a fragile non-employee spouse with no current operational knowledge. That was when I understood the full design of it. They were not only replacing me, they were pre-writing my discrediting. At 6:30, while I was still sitting at the kitchen table with those pages spread in front of me, Alistair came home for the first time since the hotel. He walked in like a guest in a model house, expensive coat over one arm, phone in hand, the smell of winter air and cologne following him through the foyer. He looked at the table and then at me. "You've been busy." "Have I?" He pulled out a chair but did not sit. "Let's stop pretending you belong in this process. You don't know what the board needs now. You barely knew when you were useful." There it was, clearer than before. Not carelessness, belief. I looked up at him. "Useful?" He gave a small shrug, almost bored. "You were useful when dinner was hot and signatures were easy." The room went still. He must have seen something change in my face because he softened his tone by half a degree, which was his favorite form of manipulation. "Don't do this to yourself, Ellie. Nobody in that building is waiting to hear from a woman who hasn't worked a real day in years." He thought that was the killing line. Instead, it gave me exactly what I needed. Contempt, stated plainly enough to survive daylight. I said nothing. Silence has a way of making arrogant men fill space they should fear. He mistook it for collapse and stepped closer. "The party tomorrow night will put this to bed. Vanessa will be presented properly, the board will settle, and you can leave with some dignity if you stop clawing at things beyond you." Some dignity. As if dignity were his to issue. He left 10 minutes later after changing for a dinner I was not invited to, and I sat there listening to the garage door close. Then I called Irene and Martin from the same chair. By the next evening, the hotel ballroom looked as polished and false as a wedding cake under too many lights. Gold drapes, white orchids, ice sculptures no one would remember. Senior staff clustered near the bar, pretending not to measure one another's usefulness. Bankers in dark suits, wives in satin. a local business reporter with perfect hair and a smile that said she smelled blood under the speeches. I had not planned to go in early, but pain woke me before dawn, and once I was up, there was no point lying to myself. I dressed slowly, pinned my hair back, and chose a black dress with sleeves because it made me feel held together. When I reached the mezzanine outside the VIP lounge, I heard Vanessa before I saw her. Her laugh. Then Alistair's lower voice, warm in that private way he had once reserved for me. I stopped beside the frosted glass partition, and there they were, close enough that the sight of them landed in my body before it reached my mind. Vanessa stood with one hand spread lightly at the side of his neck, her thumb resting under his jaw. She leaned in and said something that made him smile. Then he held out his hand to her, not to shake, to guide, to claim. She took it, and he closed his fingers around hers with that same intimate certainty I had once carried into ballrooms, like a promise. When the room turns ugly, look for my hand. My stomach clenched so hard I thought for a moment I might fold. Vanessa saw me first. She did not let go right away. She let me see it. That was the point. Alistair turned, followed her gaze, and for one thin second, all three of us stood in the same cruel geometry. The woman being replaced, the man doing the replacing, the younger one wearing the gesture like stolen jewelry. Then he smiled, cold, certain, finished with me in his own mind. He crossed the space in 3 strides, took my elbow harder than my body could manage, and steered me toward the VIP lounge doors. "Enough," he said softly. "You're coming upstairs." He did not drag me by force. That would have been easier to name. What he did was worse. He held my elbow with the practiced firmness of a man who knew exactly how much pain he could cause without leaving a mark, and he walked me through the mezzanine as though escorting a difficult wife out of sight for her own good. A few heads turned, then looked away. The VIP lounge sat above the ballroom behind smoked glass and brass handles, all low lamps and expensive carpeting that swallowed sound. I had been up there plenty of times over the years for donor dinners and board receptions. Men like Alistair rarely invent new rooms when they want to humiliate you. They reuse old ones and count on memory to do the rest. The door clicked shut behind us. For a moment, he kept his hand on my arm. Then he let go and adjusted his cuff, as if we had simply stepped aside to settle a scheduling question. "You are becoming an embarrassment," he said. I looked at him across the glass table. Crystal decanter, untouched water, a silver bowl of mixed nuts no one ever ate. My reflection in the dark window looked pale and distant. "To finish this," he said. He opened a leather portfolio and laid the papers out with maddening neatness. Divorce agreement, property schedule, confidentiality clause, a check already made out in the amount of $1 million, placed slightly to the right, like a reward for obedience. "There is nothing left to discuss, Ellie. The marriage is over. The company is moving forward. Vanessa will be announced formally tonight, and I'm not having you downstairs making scenes because you can't accept reality." I eased into the chair opposite him because my incision had begun to burn again. He noticed and mistook pain for weakness. He had always relied on the same conversion. If I was tired, then I was soft. If I was soft, then I could be managed. "You should have taken the money last night and gone home," he said. "Instead, you've been rummaging through things that don't concern you." "They seem to concern you." His mouth tightened. "Don't flatter yourself. Then he leaned one hand on the back of the chair beside me and lowered his voice into that intimate register he once used to steady me. "My mistress is the new CEO," he said. "That is happening with or without your blessing. Take the $1,000,000, sign cleanly, and get out before you humiliate yourself further." There it was again. Not only betrayal, but narrative. He needed me to confirm the story that I was small. I looked down at the papers. Celia had warned me what to watch for. Martin had told me not to confuse insult with leverage. Irene had done the ugliest part already by showing me which language mattered and which language was theater. On the surface, this was a divorce packet. Beneath it, it was Alistair's final attempt to convert my silence into his legitimacy. I turned the pages slowly, letting him think I was overwhelmed. There were clauses about marital assets, real estate, retirement accounts, non-disparagement. Then the line that mattered: acknowledgement of immediate legal separation effective upon execution. That was the line he wanted, because he believed it would wipe away the last obstacle between his ambition and my beneficial alignment. He had no idea Martin had built the structure to do the opposite. "Do you need me to explain it?" he asked. I raised my eyes to his. "No, I can read." He slid a pen across the glass. "Then stop wasting my time." I picked up the pen. His shoulders loosened. That tiny shift told me more than anything he had said. He was already savoring the relief, already stepping into the version of the night where his difficult old life had finally signed off on the new one. I signed where Celia had told me to sign. Not everywhere, not blindly, exactly where the acknowledgement needed to be made real. When I finished, I placed the pen on the table and folded my hands in my lap. He checked the signature page, then let out a low breath of satisfaction. "Good. That was the first sensible thing you've done in months." He pushed the check toward me. "You can deposit that Monday. Stay in the house for a week if you need to, then find something smaller, somewhere quiet. This doesn't have to be ugly unless you make it ugly." I looked at the check. $1,000,000. The price of being erased gracefully. "I won't need it tonight," I said. He gave me a thin smile. "Take it anyway. Consider it gratitude." Then he moved toward the door, already reaching for his phone. "Compose yourself before you come downstairs," he said. "Or better yet, use the service elevator and go home." He paused with his hand on the brass handle. "No one is going to choose a housewife over leadership, Ellie." The door shut behind him. I sat very still until the sound of his steps disappeared. Then I took out my phone. My hand shook that time, but not from fear, from timing. From the hard, bright knowledge that he had just stepped cleanly into every inch of the trap he had laid for me. Martin answered at once. "It's done," I said. On the other end of the line, I heard ballroom noise, and a glass struck lightly for attention. Then Martin said, calm as winter, "Good. The stock transfer is ready." I stayed in the chair for another 10 seconds after Martin said the transfer was ready. Not because I needed courage, because in rooms like that, timing is a form of power. And I had spent too many years watching men waste it by mistaking volume for control. When I finally stood, the pull in my abdomen was sharp enough to make me grip the edge of the glass table. I breathed through it, smoothed the front of my dress, and slid the signed packet back into Alistair's leather folder exactly where he had left it. Let him think his version of the night was still lying neatly in place. Let him walk downstairs believing paper had made him safe. The ballroom noise drifted up through the floor in soft waves. Laughter, cutlery, the low rise and fall of people performing prosperity for one another. I could smell roasted meat and perfume, and the faint metallic chill of hotel air conditioning working too hard against a crowded room. My phone buzzed twice in quick succession. The first message was from Irene. "I'm at the rear service station by the east curtain. I have the real packet, the ledger, and the routing log." The second was from Martin. "Do not come down yet. Let him begin." There was a cold elegance to that instruction. Martin understood what Alistair feared most was not accusation. It was interruption at the exact moment he was trying to become official. I moved to the dark window overlooking the ballroom below. From up there, the whole evening looked staged within an inch of its life. White floral arrangements, gold uplighting thrown against the walls. The company logo projected above the small platform where speeches were usually made. Round tables filled with senior staff, lenders, vendors, board spouses, and the kind of local business people who always appeared wherever money was about to change hands. Even the city magazine reporter was still there, nursing a drink near the back. That was why this room mattered. If Alistair lost in court months later, he could still frame it as complexity. If he lost in private, he could buy time, reshape the story, call it a misunderstanding between adults. But if he lost here, under chandeliers and donor smiles and bored eyes, with the people who had admired him watching the admiration leave their own faces, then he would lose the thing he actually loved most, his moral costume. He had spent years teaching everyone which version of us to believe. He was the builder, I was the wife. He was the strategist, I was the soft furniture around success. He was forward motion, I was a casserole and a Christmas card. To destroy that lie, it had to be done where the lie had been most carefully fed. I stepped into the hallway and took the service stairs down one level instead of the main grand staircase. My heels sounded smaller there, sharper, less ceremonial. At the base of the stairs, Irene was waiting where she said she would be, near a linen station hidden behind a gold curtain. She held a slim black portfolio against her side and looked as if she were about to correct a filing error, not help dismantle a man in public. "You all right?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I'm upright." "That'll do." She opened the portfolio just enough for me to see the order she had arranged. First, the share ledger and the founder letter, then the unaltered board packet, then the altered one with the inserted language, then the routing log showing selective circulation, then the reimbursement records, then Vanessa's message about the spouse piece. Last, the draft statement describing me as fragile and operationally irrelevant in case I became disruptive. It was a clean chain, not emotional, not messy. One thing leading to the next the way truth usually does when nobody is allowed to perform over it. "Celia is here?" I asked. "In the side corridor with compliance counsel," Irene said. "Martin called him 20 minutes ago. He's annoyed." "Good." "Very." I almost smiled. That was another thing Alistair had never fully understood. The cleanest allies are not the ones who adore you. They are the ones who despise procedural insult. From the ballroom came the bright clink of a spoon against a glass. A hush followed, rippling table by table. Irene looked toward the curtain opening. "He's starting." We moved just enough to see through the side gap. Alistair had taken the platform already, one hand around the microphone, the other loose at his side as if the room belonged to his breathing. Vanessa stood a few feet away in a white dress with a structured collar, smiling with the composed expectancy of a woman who had rehearsed gratitude in the mirror. Martin remained seated at the headboard table, unreadable. That was deliberate, too. Let Alistair think the old man was only observing. I watched my husband scan the room with the confidence of someone who believed every relevant piece was finally under his control. Information, sympathy, optics. He thought he owned all three. He began with the usual things: growth, headwinds, vision, the future. A few warm lines about resilience and transition. He thanked the board for steady guidance and the leadership team for courage. He did not look toward me because he did not know where I was, and that pleased me more than it should have. Then he invited Vanessa closer with a small turn of his body, subtle enough to look professional to anyone who did not know the private language underneath it. Look for my hand. I felt the memory pass through me and go cold. Beside me, Irene slipped the founder letter to the front of the stack. Martin will let him say just enough, she murmured. Then he'll ask the first question. And if Alistair lies? He will. That answer steadied me more than reassurance could have. On the platform, Alistair lifted his glass and smiled out over the ballroom. I'm proud, he said, to introduce the next chapter of Hale Whitmore. Martin Hale stood, and across the room, through a forest of centerpieces and crystal, he turned his face just enough to find mine. Then he gave me one small nod. I stepped out from behind the gold curtain before Martin could ask my name. That mattered. Not because I needed to be seen dramatically, but because men like Alistair survive on the illusion that they decide when a woman enters the frame. I was done entering by invitation. A murmur moved across the ballroom before I had even taken 3 steps. I could feel it traveling table to table, heads turning, forks lowering. The small electric pleasure people get when a polished evening goes 1 inch off script. My incision burned with every step, and I hated that my body had chosen that exact moment to remind me it had been cut open less than a week before. But sometimes, dignity is simply continuing to walk while pain tries to negotiate with you. Alistair saw me halfway to the platform. The first thing that crossed his face was disbelief. The second was anger. The third was that smooth public smile he wore whenever he wanted to make a problem look female. Ellie, he said into the microphone, still smiling, you should be home resting. There were a few soft laughs, not many this time. I stopped at the foot of the platform and looked up at him. Vanessa had gone very still beside him, one hand fixed around the stem of her glass. She looked lovely, in the way expensive confidence often does right before it curdles. I won't be long, I said. Alistair shifted the microphone into his other hand. This isn't the place. No, it was exactly the place. Martin rose slowly from the board table. On the contrary, he said, his voice carrying without effort. Given that tonight appears to concern succession, voting authority, and the integrity of board materials, this is now precisely the place. That changed the air at once. You could feel the room sort itself into new categories. The people who knew enough to worry. The people who knew nothing and wanted the full show. The people who had privately admired Vanessa and were beginning to wonder whether admiration had been premature. Alistair gave a small, disbelieving laugh. Martin, with respect, if this is about my personal life, I prefer not to turn a company evening into a domestic spectacle. Domestic. He was still trying to cage me with the same little word. Before I could answer, Irene Dalton stepped into view from the side aisle, holding the black portfolio against her chest. I heard at least one person whisper her name. That pleased me too. Irene was not glamorous enough for a rumor, which made her ideal as a threat. Martin did not sit back down. This is not about your personal life, he said. It is about whether you altered governance materials, misrepresented voting conditions, and attempted to neutralize a beneficial shareholder by deceit. The room went so quiet I could hear ice settle in somebody's glass. Alistair's smile thinned. That is a serious accusation. It is, Martin said, which is why we will proceed carefully. That was his first gift to me in public. Not rescue, procedure. Alistair looked toward me, then toward Irene, then back to Martin. His eyes had not reached fear yet, but they had left comfort. This is absurd, he said. Eleanor is emotional, under medication, and no longer involved in company operations. If she has misunderstood something in the middle of a painful divorce, I would ask the board not to indulge it. There it was, the whole rotten structure in one sentence. Emotional, medicated, no longer involved. He laid the labels down as if the room had agreed to them years ago. I took one step closer. Then why, I asked, did you need my signature to steal the room? No one laughed. That line landed exactly where I wanted it to. Not as a wounded wife's complaint, as a business question, a structural question. If I was as irrelevant as he claimed, then my signature should have meant nothing. The contradiction opened in front of everyone at once. Vanessa's face changed first. Just a flicker. Just enough to see she knew the answer before the room did. Alistair recovered quickly, because of course he did. The divorce was a separate matter. Irene opened the portfolio. No, she said, calm as printer paper. It was not. She moved to the nearest service table, set down the folder, and handed copies first to Martin, then to two board members seated nearest the front. She did not rush. She did not perform. She simply became the most dangerous person in the ballroom by acting as though facts belonged there more than anybody's ego. The board received two versions of the succession packet, she said. One through standard circulation, one through selective revised circulation. The second contained language not present in the original packet, including a reference to neutralizing Mrs. Whitmore's beneficial alignment upon execution of marital separation documents. A banker at table 3 leaned forward. One of the spouses put down her fork so sharply it clicked against the china. Alistair's voice hardened. Irene, you are out of line. No, she said. I'm in the minutes. That nearly knocked the breath out of me. It also made 3 people at the back openly turn in their chairs. Martin held up the founder letter but did not read from it yet. Not yet. He was doing exactly what needed to be done. Let the first crack show before the wall came down. Alistair tried again, still pushing for moral framing. Even if there was a draft discrepancy, it does not change the leadership question. Vanessa is still the strongest operational candidate in the room. Vanessa lifted her chin slightly, as if that might still save her. I looked from him to her, and then out at the people who had once watched me set centerpieces, host client wives, keep names straight, refill coffee, and disappear on cue. So many of them had accepted the smaller version of me because it was convenient and prettily wrapped. The leadership question, I said, starts with whether this room was lied to before the vote ever began. That was when the first real shift happened. Not outrage, not yet. Recognition. I saw it moving across faces, one by one. Not that Alistair had betrayed his wife. That was gossip, smaller, easier. What they were recognizing now was that he might have manipulated governance itself, and that he had used the image of a discarded housewife as cover to do it. Martin turned to Irene. Please continue. She lifted the second packet, and all across the ballroom, The people who had come for a polished announcement began, finally, to understand they were standing inside a fraud. Irene did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She laid out the sequence the way a surgeon lays out instruments. The original packet, the altered packet, the routing log showing which board members received which version and when, the reimbursement trail for hotel stays and client development weekends, then Vanessa's text, printed in black and white, where she referred to me as the spouse piece that would be neutralized once the divorce packet was signed. No one in the ballroom moved much after that. It is strange what silence sounds like when money is listening. Not empty, tight. Alistair stepped down from the platform at last, not toward me, but toward Martin. "This proves nothing except poor judgment in drafting," he said. "You're turning internal messiness into theater." Martin looked to compliance counsel, the narrow man Celia had positioned near the side corridor. "Counsel," Martin said. He opened a folder. "I reviewed the altered packet, the trust structure, and the circulation record. In my opinion, the inserted language materially misrepresented the voting implications of Mrs. Whitmore's beneficial shares. If this was done knowingly in connection with a succession vote, it constitutes a fiduciary breach." That was when Alistair went pale. Not when the affair spending came out, not when Vanessa's texts surfaced. Those might still have been private ugliness. Fiduciary breach was different. It was a board word, a lender word, a removal word. Vanessa tried first. "I had no role in any trust language," she said. "I was asked to prepare transition messaging, that's all." I turned toward her. "You redlined my name out of the founding history." Irene handed Martin the memo with Vanessa's margin note. "It muddies the forward-facing narrative." Someone at the back let out a low, shocked breath. There it was. Not gossip now, recognition. They saw that I had not simply been left, I had been edited. Alistair pulled himself straighter. "Even if there were errors, the company still needs leadership tonight." "It does," Martin said, "which is why you will not be providing it." He turned to the board table. "I am moving for immediate suspension of Alistair Whitmore's executive authority pending formal investigation. I am also moving to void the succession recommendation built on altered materials and to recognize the protective transfer now triggered and completed." Then he lifted the founder letter and read the sentence that had waited 17 years for air. "In recognition of material contribution to continuity, stability, and fiduciary preservation, protective shares shall remain beneficially aligned to Eleanor Whitmore in the event of spousal or executive breach." Heads turned toward me so fast it almost looked like impact. Alistair stared at Martin. "You can't seriously be handing this company to a housewife." That was the last mistake he made. I stepped forward. "You kept calling me a housewife because that was the only way to hide who built your balance sheet." The room went dead still. "You thought if you made me sound small enough, no one would notice you needed my signature, my records, my silence, and my absence to pull this off." Martin called the vote. It happened faster than Alistair had probably imagined anything in his life could move against him. Suspension, investigation, void the succession packet, confirm the transfer, appoint interim leadership to stabilize operations. Hands went up, one after another. When it was done, Martin looked at me across the wreckage of my marriage and said, "The board votes to appoint Eleanor Whitmore, interim CEO, effective immediately." Alistair took one step toward me then, stripped bare at last. "Ellie, listen to me." I raised my hand just enough to stop him. "I didn't come here for my marriage," I said. "I came here for the record." No one turned back to him after that. Not the board, not the bankers, not even Vanessa, who stood with her face drained clean of ambition staring at the floor. For the first time in years, Alistair was in a room he could not control. And as the silence closed over him, I understood exactly what peace would cost, and exactly why I was finally willing to pay it. 3 months later, I was still walking a little carefully in the mornings. Bodies keep their own calendars. Mine still tugged when the weather changed, especially on cold Missouri mornings when the parking lot looked blue before sunrise. I would unlock the side entrance with the travel mug in one hand and stand for a moment in the dark lobby listening to the heat come on through the vents. It felt different without his voice in it. Cleaner. The board made my role official after the investigation began. Interim first, then permanent when the numbers steadied. Irene stayed exactly where she belonged, running the records like a woman who had no interest in praise and therefore could be trusted with nearly everything. Martin moved into the background, which was always his most useful position. Celia handled the divorce with the same merciless neatness she had brought to every other part of the mess. Alistair tried, through lawyers and carefully worded messages, to negotiate tone, as if the problem between us had been style. I never answered the parts that were not legal. Vanessa was gone before Christmas. No dramatic exit, no last speech. People like her rarely vanish in a blaze. They disappear by degrees. One invitation not extended, one returned call delayed too long. I did not ask where she landed. What surprised me was not how loud justice felt. It was how domestic it was. Payroll still had to run on Thursdays. The warehouse roof still leaked above Bay 3 when it rained hard from the west. Someone in purchasing still ordered too much packaging every second month. The coffee in the executive kitchen was still terrible unless I made it myself. Truth did not descend like thunder and leave everything transformed. It simply removed the hand that had been pressing on the scale. A week before Christmas, I brought in a banker's box from home and slid it onto the credenza in my office. Old ledgers, founder photos, yellow legal pads with my younger handwriting in the margins. I kept one of the early pictures in a drawer, not on display. In it, I was standing beside the first folding table we ever used as a bookkeeping desk, wearing a cardigan and looking tired in the plain, honest way young women do when they are building two lives at once and calling it love. I did not keep it to mourn him. I kept it to remember myself. That turned out to be the real ending. Not the vote, not the ballroom, not even hearing the board say my name and mean it. It was the quieter thing that came after. Sitting in my office at dusk with a stack of vendor reports, feeling no need to explain how I got there. Going home to a house that was no longer a stage set for somebody else's appetite. Eating soup at the counter in silence and finding the silence generous. Sleeping through the night. Opening the mail without dread. There are women who will hear a story like mine and think the point is revenge. It isn't. The point is that some people survive by making you seem smaller than the work you did, smaller than the truth you know, smaller than the place you earned. And if that has ever happened to you, I hope you never mistake being quiet for being powerless. If you have ever been written smaller so someone else could look larger, leave your state, your city, or just the word record in the comments. I always read them. Sometimes the cleanest thing a woman can do is let the record speak in her full size.